Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 41 of the Nurtured by Nature podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined in conversation by Leah, author of the recently released book Earth and Soul: Reconnecting Amid Climate Chaos. In Leah, I found a true kindred spirit, someone who has a deep love, respect, and friendship for Mother Earth and all the beings we share our world with, and a particular fondness for the tree folk. Her beautiful book is a signpost to hope for all of us that emerged as she herself grappled with the question, how do those of us who care about the earth live in these times? How do we navigate our collective grief and sorrow without being consumed and losing our way? Leah provides a narrative of gentle remembering, of not turning away from our dear friend Mother Earth during her suffering, but of coming together to bear witness with open hearts, to hold each other as we move through these difficult edge times, finding ways to keep going through the uncertainty, to take each step slowly and pause as we actively help to write a different story of a more positive future for all beings. We explore ways to hold the grief during these times of unravelling, from seeking company to remembering to embrace awe and wonder, through practices like the Celtic five-stringed harp and the mindset of the pilgrim in communion with the land, remembering the lost art of softness that reminds us we don't always have to make things happen, but can allow things to reveal themselves when they want to be seen. Leah encourages us to value these edge or threshold times, to find sanctuary in this discernment of cultivating deep listening as we remember that a different relationship with nature is possible, so we can pick up the threads and help to weave a new vision for the earth. Welcome, Leah, and thank you so much for joining us today on this episode of the Nurtured by Nature podcast. I'm really looking forward to having this conversation with you, having read your lovely book, Earth and Soul: Reconnecting Amid Climate Chaos. So just absolutely resonated with so much that you talked about in there. But to get us started, I always ask my guests just to share a little bit about their nature story, which is just a fun way to get us started, and it can just be interpreted any way you like, some fond memories of nature or what nature's meant to you through your life. So if there's anything you'd like to share to get us started, that'd be lovely.
Well, I love the question. Thank you for that, Fiona. And thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to connect together and to share some mutual stories, maybe. Yeah. So I think, I was nurtured by nature. I grew up in a home in the middle of the country, basically. Some people would say in the middle of nowhere. It was actually in the middle of Kansas, which is in the middle of the United States. And so think prairie and farmland and wheat fields and not a lot of trees, a lot of open space. Yeah. Neighbors were fairly far away, and I was the oldest. My brother didn't come along for another 4.5 years.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you had quite a lot of time on your own.
I did. I had a lot of time to myself, so it was sort of me and the dog and the chickens and wandering around outside and, 2 hot nights to stay inside, lying on the picnic table, watching the stars, which of course you can imagine there was not a lot of light pollution where I was growing up. So, I wouldn't paint it as idyllic in the sense that, my parents were working hard and taking care of a lot. And yet, in terms of feeling connected, I feel like I was outdoors all the time. Yeah. The home was small and we were out in
playground.
Yeah, it totally was. We were in the garden or, doing something outside, it seemed all the time. So, even the laundry, there was a wash house. So my mom would have to go out to the wash house to do
Yeah.
laundry, and clothes were hung on the line to dry.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of that growing up in the living world around me. And then even when we moved to a town, when I was in like fifth grade, it was a very small town. And kids were still playing outside, and there was a lot of, trees and bugs and rabbits and squirrels and all of that. But I will say then, when some years after I grew up, my husband and I moved around a lot, and a lot of our time was spent in cities.
Yeah.
We lived in Australia for a while,
Oh,
in the
wow.
Sydney area.
Amazing.
We lived in New York City. We lived in
Oh, wow.
Washington,
Oh, my
D.C.
goodness.
We've lived,
Really
we've
big
lived in,
cities.
yeah,
Yeah.
big
Yeah.
places where you could go to Central Park, or, there were certainly places you could go to get outside, but you needed to make that deliberate
Yeah.
because when I was working a lot, I was in the corporate world. And so it was, go down the stairs, get into your car that's in your garage, drive to work, park in the garage, go up the elevator. I could spend a considerable amount of time without being
Outside.
outside.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I really miss that when I left the last sort of 9 to 5-ish job. None of them ever really 9 to 5, but
Yeah.
when I left, when I left that world, one of the things we did was move out to a little farm for a few years before we moved into this co-housing community that is in a really small town, and we're surrounded by woods and trails, so
Yeah.
on. So it took me, I started in nature and felt like I had these deep roots that I've always loved and cared about, and, wanted to be around trees and flowers that bloom in the spring.
Yeah.
But a lot of time, in the indoors before I made my way back to
Yeah.
feeling
I think that's
like I was
quite a
reconnecting. Yeah.
common thing for people, isn't it? And
Mm,
I think it's lovely when you have had that roots in nature as a child that it is something that you can return to with some familiarity. But equally, like you said, it's also something that people you can sometimes when you're in an urban environment you have to make more of an effort, but there is nature there and available to you
mhm.
to enjoy and connect with, which is what's important, really, isn't it? I think, and it's
Right.
harder for people in those urban environments to forge that connection, but it is still possible.
Well, I think sometimes, at least for me, I was moving so quickly that there were many opportunities that I just didn't take because it was a fast pace. My
Yeah,
mind was elsewhere, and I wasn't really as conscious as I am now of that real need
yeah,
to be connected. How much a part of how that not only supports our health and well-being, but it's a
yeah,
spirit, soul, heart
yeah.
connection that really matters.
Yeah. And then, I mean, I love it. I loved you've mentioned about your childhood in Kansas because your book has got some lovely tales of your time in childhood. There was a lovely one where you mentioned watching all the storm clouds and
Hmm.
how it was important because I guess is that the area that you get a lot of tornado. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah. So it
yes.
was a time before there was all the alarm systems that
Hmm.
we have now. So it was really important to sort of be aware of the weather, I guess, as well at that time.
Yes, I think, I noticed that when we moved out to the farm too, it occurred to me that when people spoke about weather, because it seems like a very common topic, we're always
Especially
saying,
we're
oh,
English, yeah. We love to talk about the
oh, well,
weather.
we do too. It's really hot today, isn't it? It's almost like what we'd call an icebreaker, right? You
Yeah,
don't know what to say to somebody. So
yeah,
even you're passing them on the street, just to be cordial, you say, oh,
yeah,
what a beautiful day, isn't
yeah,
it? Or
yeah,
whatever. Um, but when we moved out to the farm and people would talk about the weather, I thought, wow, this is livelihood.
yeah,
If you're farming, for instance, or if you're dependent on the garden that
yeah,
you're
yeah,
growing, it matters
you're more woven with
because
it, aren't you?
absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely, it's part of your livelihood. And
yeah,
of course, I think back to my childhood watching, watching the storm clouds. That was a life, um, you know, issue. You had to
yeah,
pay attention to what was
yeah,
happening around you because you were not going to be dependent on somebody else giving a special warning for your little house out in the middle of the prairie.
yeah, yeah.
you know,
Well, and equally like the time to react to it as well if you're in a
right.
quite an isolated place. But yeah, I think it's I mean your book is amazing and I think there's so many themes that you cover in it. But obviously the title itself is reconnecting and that's something that I often talk about with a lot of my guests is really this and it is reconnecting rather than connecting that there's the subtlety of that isn't there of it's a sort of remembering of connections that are held in our
Yeah.
DNA almost, and they're there and
Mhm.
available to all of us, but we have made ourselves busy, I suppose, like you you mentioned in the city, and it's a struggle, and not necessarily natural for a lot of people to forge those connections.
Mhm. I think that's right. And I think the way you said it is so important because in many ways it's impossible. Well, in every way, it's impossible not to be connected.
Yeah,
It's very possible not to remember
yeah,
that we are or to act as if we're not. And yet, we know it would be a momentary life if we didn't have the air to breathe, if we didn't have the
yeah,
water to drink, if we were not, restoring ourselves with the plants that we eat. All
yeah,
of that is a part of how we are literally connected to this living world. And yet, I do think it's somehow easy to forget. Our culture doesn't often invite us to remember.
yeah,
Perhaps that's part of it.
yeah,
And we have kind of embedded values. I'll use that term loosely, embedded values of being separate, of being individual, um, you know,
yeah. Our whole language.
human centric.
I
Yeah.
was going to say our whole language and society, particularly in well, sort of the westernized
Mhm.
world, centers around this sort of notion of the hierarchy, doesn't it? With humans at the pinnacle, at the apex, and I mean, you touch on that quite a lot in your book as well of the notion that like nature, how we came to see nature as a resource, basically, and therefore it enabled us to sort of pillage it, and
Mhm. Mhm.
and also you almost
Yeah.
had to disconnect it from it to be able to use it in that way, really.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, this is where indigenous and land-based peoples have so much to teach us about how
Yeah,
you could receive the gifts,
yeah,
to use the way that Robin Wall Kimmerer writing Sweetgrass, the way that she talks about it. And by the way, she's a real hero of mine.
yeah,
I could read that book a dozen more times, and I think
yeah.
I've
I
already
love
read it
that
four
book.
or
It's
five. So
amazing. Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
really.
there's always something new to be learned from it. But I think that's so instructive to think about how you can accept the gifts of the natural world.
Yeah,
And that is a very different mindset, a different heart way of thinking
yeah,
than to own or to take
yeah,
um, what you want, but rather to see it as a gift and accept it, and then know that there's an obligation because you've accepted that gift to engage in reciprocity, to return gifts as well.
yeah.
And it creates that relationship. I was talking the other day because my husband and I had just watched a documentary about the American bison, the buffalo,
Oh, yeah. Okay.
and how in before the white settlers came, certainly the tribes were hunting buffalo, and the nations were embedding buffalo in virtually every aspect of their life. They were wrapping themselves in it for warmth. That was part of their
Yeah.
shelter. It was food. It was ceremony. And yet, that created such a deep relationship that was so incredibly different than they're there, we will kill them,
Yeah.
and because apparently the tongues were considered valuable food and the rest of the corpse would just
It's just
be
discarded.
left. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's, that is, I think, important for us to know. And it's something we can listen to and change and address. This whole story that we've created about how the world is and how separate it is from us is simply a story.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
once you realize you're living in a story, you do have choices to change the story.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's easy.
Yeah.
It's not at all.
No.
And you're surrounded by other people who are living in that story. So
Yeah.
sometimes it can be quite off-putting to
Yeah.
friends and family that you want to be in a different story.
Yeah.
But to know it's possible, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really key, isn't it? I had a lovely guest who does a lot of poetry a few weeks ago, and she said to remind us that the story is still being written, the ending is not
Mhm.
determined, and therefore, we can still write the story and it can unfold in the manner we want to envision. And
Yeah.
I think that's a really empowering thought for people because I mean, so a lot of the initial bit of your book focuses on sort of witnessing, I guess, the feelings that a lot of people who care about the environment have at this time, don't they? These
Mhm.
overwhelming sense of grief and despair. I mean, in one chapter, I know you talk particularly about like the Congo and a news headline that just literally like left you speechless. And I mean, that's part of why I started my podcast was just to give a space for people who had these feelings, but just to find a way to remind them that actually that's not the end of the story. That's just the bit we're in now.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's so important, Fiona. It's not the end of the story, and yet it is an important chapter.
Yeah,
So to try to tear that out of the book,
yeah,
or to take that stanza out of the poem, or to just want to run and hide or look
yeah,
away. I understand the longing for that. I mean,
yeah.
there's some really tough pain and loss that we face into when we really pay attention
It's
to
a
what's
heavy burden,
happening.
isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it is. It
yeah,
is. And yet, I just think if we had a dear friend who was suffering, we would not call it any kind of friendship if we just ran away and
yeah,
locked the doors and ignored that person was facing a significant health crisis. It is because of the friendship that we sit with that person, we bear witness, we ask how we can help, even if we can't solve everything. We
yeah,
try to be there. And I'm not at all suggesting that's easy. I am suggesting it's important. And I think
yeah,
it's an important part of our spiritual work,
yeah,
that we break open our hearts, as Joanna Macy often uses
yeah,
that term. We break open our hearts, and then that heart can hold more, can hold the grief and also, the beauty and the love and the delight and the joy that's also there because
yeah.
has not gone away, you
I
know.
think that's the thing, isn't it? It's finding that balance between acknowledging it because it is important. It's not about, having the rose-tinted glasses and pretending it isn't happening. It's, having an awareness of it, but with not being consumed by it, I think is
Mhm,
is,
mhm,
to the point that you're lost, I guess, really, isn't it? It's
mhm,
like,
mhm.
if you really end up sort of completely consumed and lost in it,
Yeah.
it's finding that balance, isn't it? And it is very hard. And I think that's why it's so important that there are amazing people in the world like yourself who are writing books like this that can give people a little bit of a signpost to hope, I think is really a lovely
Mhm.
way to describe what you do and what you offer.
Well, thank you. I wrote the book because I was in this question of how will we live in these times,
Yeah.
you know, and I did not want to deny the horrific impacts of climate chaos and of biodiversity and ecosystem loss. And I did not want us to pull out the word sustainability and use it to mean if we put solar panels on our houses, we can keep living exactly like we
Yeah.
live.
Yeah.
Now I've got solar panels, so please, that's not saying I don't think we should do that. I do think we should do that. I simply think, and,
Yeah.
that is not, we can't have the glaciers that we've lost, the species that have gone extinct. In the US, we've lost half the songbirds in the last 50 years. You know, those are losses and we have to notice that. But then the problem becomes, oh, we're noticing that. And if we don't have an and, to explore that, if we don't have well,
Yeah.
let me say, I think we need several things. We need several things to be able to hold that kind of grief. We need company on that journey.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
So I'm appreciative of what you're doing because I think that's one way we create an acknowledgement and a relationship with others who are doing this work and who care. And we can, buoy each other's spirits and tell each other stories and hold hands when we need
Yeah.
it and give ourselves permission when we need to step away from it for a while, and do some healing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's one. And our companions on this journey don't only have to be human. The living world
Absolutely.
is
Yeah,
doing
absolutely.
this work
Yeah.
and has an incredible amount of wisdom and, and experience over, the extremely long period of time that this earth has been here. So we can think of the earth as a colleague, as a friend, as someone who's aligning with us to do this work and get support. And we can spend that time and, acknowledging the beauty and the awe and wonder. And I keep giving class assignments when I teach something about this book, like, okay, this week, go find multiple doses of awe and wonder.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. Yeah, I love that. I had a lovely guest quite early on in my podcast, and she talked about forest bathing, but she also talked about awe walks and basically
Mm,
going out into
yeah.
nature and finding like, moments of like awe and wonder. And I guess it sits really nicely with gratitude as well. And you just it's just an
Yeah.
amazing practice. And I think you lead a lot of pilgrimages, or at least do you still lead them now? You used to lead a lot.
Well, I've made a switch. A colleague of mine at the Center for Spirituality and Nature and I were doing some work together. And at her suggestion, we started doing what we call pilgrimages close to home.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's nice.
And so I'm kind of enamored of that now.
Yeah.
Doesn't take much fossil fuel to
Yeah.
travel, you know. I mean,
Yeah.
I've had some lovely experience. I've led,
I think
dozens of pilgrimages. And, it's also right there around us. So,
I think that's really important, isn't it? Because sometimes, I mean, obviously, I've traveled a lot, and I grew up in the UK, and Africa held a huge fascination for me, and there is certainly awe and wonder further afield. But when I did return to the UK, I was very much aware of the fact that there is amazing things on my own doorstep that perhaps I'd overlooked in my desperation to to experience bigger and better and by watching David Attenborough as a child. And
oh,
I think
yeah,
yeah, I
he'll,
think
he'll do it.
yeah, and I think it is. I love that idea because I think that's something that everyone who's listening could, sort of embody, couldn't you? It's like, step outside your own door if you're in a city, find a nice local park, or if you've got a garden, or just the area around you, and have your own little pilgrimage, and sort of treat it in that sort of spiritual way. It's just,
Yeah.
yeah, it's fantastic. Oh,
Yeah. Yeah, I think we need to be reminded sometimes of that. I too love to travel. And so I do acknowledge, and I acknowledge in the book stories of many of the places that I've been that really, really spoke to me and opened my heart and deepened my
yeah,
connection. And that's not to say that that's not available um, everywhere. I mean,
yeah,
that heart of a pilgrim can go to a very small circle in your own backyard or your neighboring botanical garden or whatever, and just to sit and gaze and
yeah.
be present to what is can be pretty amazing.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, is it's giving yourself time as well to quiet that hectic, busy mind that we have
Mhm.
we have to have, really, to live in our sort of modern society. Unfortunately, it does require us to be sort of at this sort of busyness all the time, doesn't it? There's a lot of demands on our attention, on our mind.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, you mentioned, I don't know if you'd share a little bit, but you mentioned a lovely Celtic practice that you used to encourage people to do when you did your pilgrimages to Iona. And
Yeah.
I'd love it if you could maybe share that, because I thought it was really just, yeah, a magical way to.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I have to say, a pilgrimage to, for those who don't know, the lovely Isle of Iona off the coast of Mull, off the coast of Scotland, the Iona itself just leads the whole pilgrimage. I mean, it's a gift if you're a leader. You have very little to do except help people figure out how to get there, and then kind of hold the space because the beauty and the ruggedness and
Yeah,
lots of edges, lots of thin places. And it's said that the ancient Celts used to go to the edges because that was the place that was thinnest, where you were closer to heaven and earth
yeah.
um, melding together.
Oh, wow.
So the practice that we would use is called tuning the five-stringed harp, and the five strings being the five senses. So one by one, we would, take a few deep breaths and sink in, and then we might say we want to tune our hearing. So you could sit and close your eyes and just really tune into that listening. You can do that for as long as you want to do
Yeah.
that. Because it's pretty amazing. And you don't even have to sort of filter out voices of people and, maybe the boats in the background or whatever you're hearing. Just let that be part of the landscape as well, and let that really, really carry you. And then you would gradually go into the next. And we would do that as a prelude to sitting in quiet and reflecting over maybe
Yeah.
a little reading or a poem or something like that, or just gazing into the water. Because as you know, it's such a small island, water's everywhere,
Yeah.
every way you look.
Yeah, I think
So,
there's there's two things I want to do there. The first thing I wanted you to talk about is this idea of gazing. So I love this notion, and I think it's something that perhaps people aren't familiar with, but it's a lovely way of just exploring the world around you in a very easy manner, I suppose, really.
well, I often give the practice when I'm leading retreats of taking a piece of string, maybe 6 feet long, and then just draping a circle somewhere and sitting with that for a half an hour. And I always invite people to gaze rather than to look. And what I'm trying to do, you mentioned softness, I'm trying to suggest that we don't need to make something happen.
Yeah.
So if we're walking along in our busy mind, which has to do with this long list of things we must accomplish, then this becomes something else to accomplish. You know, I need to see something that I'm going to go back and report on.
Yeah.
You know, so then I try to make it happen. And in fact, what I'm inviting you to do is to not reach out in that way, but to let whatever wants to be seen come to you. Right. So that's a practice of just gazing, softening the focus and just being there, being centered. We're somatically, you know, we're always often leaning into what needs to be done or backing up into the past, you know, and we're not really right here right now. So this is a part of that being here. And of course, you can gaze close up and you can gaze in the distance, and you can trade back and forth between both of those sometimes to remind yourself. You know, there's also a wonderful practice. And I'm trying to remember the author's name, and it'll come to me later. But she suggests the idea of receiving a picture rather than taking a picture.
Okay.
So sometimes I've invited people to do that too.
Yeah.
You know, when you go out, if you think about, I've got to take a picture, and then that goes into that, you know, is this one good enough? And I went better. And then I post it on my Facebook and Instagram or wherever, you know, what wants to be given to us. So maybe there's only 2 pictures a day that actually come to you and ask to be received.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
You know, these are just ways that we try to break out of that story is really what we're trying to do. Try to break out of that predominant story of, you know, of separation and distance, and living from only being logical, rational, and instead opening to other ways of knowing, you know, that's about heart, soul, body, senses. The other ways of knowing that are ways in which it makes it easier to connect more deeply with the world around us, because most of the world is not speaking to us in English.
Yeah, I love that. I think, and it's where you begin to start to sense the beings around you as well. You know, they suddenly, you know, you allow space for them to attract your attention in the myriad ways that they do it. You know, you suddenly notice the flower maybe shining a little brighter, or, you know, there's one tree that's moving in a breeze that doesn't exist. And I mean, that's something else I love about your work and the things that you do. I mean, you're very you're very interested in trees, and you talk extensively on their amazing beings, aren't they? They're incredible.
They are.
And their amazing relationships that they have between each other and the world around them. And yeah, well, we could probably have a whole episode.
Let's do,
sharing our mutual love of our tree friends.
That's right.
Yeah, but you mentioned when you were talking about Iona, and I just want to come back to this because I think it's an important subject, and that's the edges. And I mean that's an ecological term as well, sort of ecotones.
Exactly.
Which perhaps people might not be familiar with. So I don't know if you want to share a little bit about that, but then also talk about why. I mean, you refer as well to the fact that we're in an edge time, and I love that. I think it's a really important concept.
Yeah. Well, I just want to loop back and say the name Christine Waltner's Painter, because she's the one who talked about receiving instead of taking pictures. So I just want to, she's written a number of books, and you may know of her work. So I just want to put a note on that. So ecotones. Yeah. So we think about where 2 ecosystems come together, where the river meets the ocean, perhaps, and then there becomes a delta and marshlands or bogs. And so it's a different a different ecosystem is created, or a forest and prairie where those are coming together. That kind of in-between space is that ecotone. And an ecotone presents real possibilities. It can be difficult for forest creatures to move to prairie and vice versa. Those ecotone, those in-between places have a lot of potential there. They also sometimes are places that we seem to value less, particularly thinking about bogs and marshes, or even sometimes peatland, or whatever. The boggy places have not really captured our hearts the way that forest and grasslands have, although grasslands even sometimes not so much either. So those are places of great thriving for creatures, great creativity, great possibility, and not easy places either.
Yeah.
So that both andness, I think, is also what I talk about. We talk about edges, right? Yeah. So if you're going to the edge, you're going to the cliffs. So I had a particular story in mind when I started talking about edges. And I was thinking that when we are out in the living world, my husband and our two kids, who are adults now, always want to walk to the edge. If there is a cliff, they walk as close as they can to the edge. And I am in the background going, could you back away? Could you back away? We had a wonderful trip some years ago, maybe 10 or so, to the Isles, Harris and Lewis, and the Outer Hebrides. And I so remember, here is this incredible, rugged, beautiful cliffside. And of course, my husband is perched as closely as he can to the edge of that. And I am trying as best I can to back away. The land is beautiful. I mean, there are all these wildflowers that are growing along this edge. And down below, a long way below, are these enormous boulders, these rocks. The waves are crashing in. And you can see, too, where part of the cliffside has been hollowed out by the waves and the wind and the weather. And so the wondering is, will that hold? Yeah. Can it hold? Obviously, part of it hasn't, because you can see down below that some of that cliff has already fallen, and some, of course, has already been swept out to sea. That just created in my mind such a metaphor for where we are. I feel that we're walking along an edge, and some of it has crumbled. We have lost much already, and other parts of it will. We may not know when, we may not know exactly how. And yet there's so much beauty, right, along this edge. So my sense was, well, this is the question. How do we live with this incredible beauty, with this loss? What is our possibility of, holding hands and helping somebody step back from the edge? Yeah. What is our possibility in, fully and deeply appreciating where we are and living fully alive and not bound in fear? Yeah. By going over. So that's what I'm speaking about when I'm speaking about the edge. You could call it threshold times, standing at the threshold. My understanding is that that is often in the old times when people lived in small cottages. Standing at the threshold is where babies were born.
Oh, okay.
Because you had the wall. It was the place you had, the door on either side that the woman could hold on to. So it, metaphors abound for us. Yeah. Exactly. What's waiting to be born? Yeah. What's waiting to be born? What am I called to midwife?
Yeah.
you know. So lots, the edge for me is really poignant. And I appreciate so much when somebody says, what do you mean by edge? Um, and in a way, it's also vague enough
Yeah.
that it may mean something different to you, and it may provoke a particular image or a thought or a
Yeah.
story
Well, I think
that
that's the
has
important
meaning. Yeah.
thing with writing, isn't it? Is it has this beautiful way of allowing people to experience it in the way that they can at that time. And I think when you mentioned Robin Kimura's book earlier, and you said you've read it like multiple times, and every time you go back to it, it has something more to offer. And I think that's the beauty of the arts and
Mm-hmm.
writing and creators in how that they can help really in this time bring forward these messages in a way that is accessible to people as well. I think in a way that has can have softness if it's needed, but also, can crack people open as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I you do mention in your book as well that about we have I think is it there's three choices basically for how things could unfold, and
Yeah.
one is business as usual. I think the other one is unraveling. Is that right? Unraveling. And then the third which is what your focus is on. And really my own
Mm-hmm.
focus with this podcast is it called The Great Turning?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think, and that's very much aligned with your notion of edge, isn't it? And the fact that,
Yeah.
we are seeing this unraveling, which is the beautiful analogy that your book starts with the old
Yeah.
lady weaving the threads
Mm-hmm.
of the world,
Mm-hmm.
which
Right.
I just
Yeah.
I'd never heard before I read your book, and I just loved it. Like it actually just it sort of gave me goosebumps, and I had to sit with with just that sort of idea for just a few days because it was just so poignant for our time. I think the fact that I think a lot of what we're fearing, which is also the uneasiness that we're having, is we can't see what's coming. Like we can't
Mm-hmm.
see the tapestry that's going to develop, and and that's frightening, isn't it, for a lot of us.
Yeah.
And but I don't, well, do you want to talk a little bit more about the Great Turning and how that can provide us with hope to move through these
Yeah.
times?
Yeah. Well, let's give credit to Joanna Macy. Those are her terms, and she's such a wonderful, wise elder in this work, and she's been talking about this for decades.
Yeah,
So I just want to acknowledge that incredible wisdom that she brings to it. And she talks about this idea of the business as usual that we long to be in, right?
yeah,
You know, and some of the things we've already talked about, the idea of separation, maybe think of patriarchy,
yeah,
you might think of colonialism. All of those are part of the fabric of business as usual in the predominant Western culture.
yeah,
Um, that exists. And, it's hard for us to think about living business as usual because it would require a lot of change for us.
yeah,
I like my home.
yeah,
I like air conditioning,
yeah,
you know? So we cling to that. And then the great unraveling is what we talk about when we talk about the losses that we're
yeah,
facing, what we can't keep doing. And then finally, the great turning is, can we make this turn to a story that has more vibrancy and more life-giving and more well-being for everyone? And how do we hold all of that is a real question.
yeah. Yeah, it is I think it's the greatest question of our time, really, isn't it? Is how we can hold this space at this time with an awareness of everything that has happened, everything that is still happening, but then find I guess almost courage, really, isn't it? Together to vision actually that we can turn, that we can grab hold of the steering wheel and say, actually, we can make a redirection in the
Hmm.
way society is headed.
Well, and I think it's a lot of little turns. I don't think the story is yet written to tell us exactly what that turning will look like.
Yeah.
And, most of us, myself included, are not very happy with uncertainty. We really want to know, like, okay, paint a picture for me of where we're going. I want to know exactly what it's going to look like. We're kind of on this threshold that we're on these edge times, whatever metaphor you think. We don't know yet. We don't know what that unfolding will be. And so standing here in this time of lack of clarity, this is where I keep thinking, well, I know that you can do something that your heart is calling you to do. I know that you have this contribution of weaving together people and inviting them to share their stories. And that's a gift to the world. And my deepest hope is that at least some little piece of what I'm writing now or in the future will be another gift. And if we
Yeah.
all make our gifts, then I think that those are, seeds that we're trying to plant. I'm very clear that if I plant a tree today, I will not live to see that become a giant oak.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we are planting for the future, and we are counting on leaving our stories and our seeds and our songs and our poems for people in the future to take and cultivate and further that story in ways we can't imagine right
Yeah.
now, in ways beyond our knowing. And in part, it's not just people, because we're also, I think, counting deeply on the animacy, the wisdom, the amazing capacity and resilience of nature to do her part as
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
because I think she's got some surprises we haven't yet figured out. So this
Yeah.
is where, I'm preaching a little bit here, but we go in with our mighty wisdom about how everything should be done, and I know exactly what needs to happen in this forest.
Yeah.
Um, we've made some horrible mistakes that way.
Yeah. I think it's we do sometimes we have a little bit of arrogance with
A
our
little
little
bit, yeah.
our little bit of knowledge, don't we? We come in and we go, we know best, and
Yeah,
nature
yeah.
comes along and goes, no, you don't.
That's
And
right. Yeah.
I had a guest a while ago, and actually she had a lovely analogy of that exact thing with her garden. She was like, I came in and I planted everything, and she said over time it's moved to where it wanted to be rather than where I put it.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
I think that's the thing, is that it's this realizing it's a partnership as well, isn't it? And again, it's a subtlety of being aware of that mindset that is so ingrained in our Western culture, that we are superior to nature, that therefore like we have to go in and fix it as well. Like it's that's still a pervading example of that mindset of, rather than being in communion with nature, we're still dictating. We're just trying to dictate for good rather than bad,
Hmm.
but we're still
Yeah.
holding that same role. And it's finding the way to actually remember a different relationship, and a relationship where we are in communion, in collaboration, rather than we know what's best.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true. I write a whole bit, and I mean, you could do a whole book about good intentions
Yeah,
gone wrong,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
so
It is, I mean, it is hard. As a lovely, I think it's Mary Angelou had a lovely quote that was like, "You do the best you can until you know better, and then when you know better, you do better." And I
Mhm.
think, there is, we do have to have some grace with ourselves, don't you? That we are, like you said, there's no blueprint for this. There's no there's no picture that we're following. We're just sort of going on faith and taking the steps we can and doing the best we can.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
so I talk a little bit about the concept of discernment, because to me, this is what we're invited to do. And discernment is based in deep listening, right? For what is being invited to happen. And I think that's the conversation that we're having with our gardens or with our local woods or the sea around us. What is it? What's being invited? And then we do the best we can, as you're saying, and it's not easy to always know and hear. So we take a step in that direction. And then we pause and say, how's this? How's this going? The the challenge sometimes is we take a step in that direction and we think, oh, so I know what the end product should be, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so we just keep running in that direction without watching and listening and getting that kind of feedback at each of the steps. And I can admit being, so eager to, I don't know if this is a term you ever use, but back when I was taking driver's education to learn to drive a car as a teenager, they had a term called over driving your headlights,
Okay.
which would mean if you were in the fog or in the dark, you shouldn't be driving so fast that you couldn't stop
In the
if
space that
something
you can see. Yeah.
exactly in the
Yeah.
space that you can see. And
Yeah.
so fog is such a great example of that. And I always want to see beyond the fog.
Yeah.
you know, I can feel my eyes getting tired when I'm driving in the fog
Yeah.
because they're trying so hard to focus.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think I'm doing that metaphorically as well. Where is this going to go? It's back to
Yeah.
that, what we were talking about just a little bit earlier, that desire to know more
Yeah.
than we'll ever know.
Yeah. It's a really difficult emotion. I think that's the best description of it for us humans to sit in, isn't it? Is this space of uncertainty because it doesn't feel safe, and that leads to a lot of
Mhm.
the fear and
Yeah.
anxiety that um, a lot of us are experiencing at this time. But yeah, I think it comes back to then this idea of actually the indigenous ways of realizing that you're not in this alone as well. And I think that's the important thing, isn't it? Is
Mhm.
realizing that, we are co-creating with everything around us, the weather, the land, the soil, the trees, the plants, the animals, the birds, everything. And yeah, we all have a part to play in it, and I think that's important as well, isn't it? Because I think there are sometimes dialogues where people think that humans humans shouldn't be here, but actually
Right.
it's not
Right.
that we're intrinsically bad or flawed. It's just we need to remember and reconnect.
Mhm. Yeah. And there are so many ways that we know people have been able to live in kinship
Yeah.
and in harmony. It's the word I was looking for with the land. I was just thinking that in your art, you must also feel that that is a co-creation.
Yeah.
It's not. I I I'm wondering if that's true, but I'm just guessing that you're not. Well, this is Fiona's work. This
Yeah.
is like a collaboration with the subject.
Yeah, it definitely is. I think initially with my photography, it was like before digital times, and so there wasn't quite as much easy editing. Obviously, you could do things in the darkroom and
Mhm.
things, but yeah, very much aware of. I think my approach to photography was almost a bearing witness to the beauty of nature and Mother Earth around us, and just trying to somehow in my sort of stumbling manner try and capture some of the awe and amazement that I felt around nature, to be able to share it with others. Because I think something for me is that's really important is that when people feel connected to something and they love it and they cherish it, then they're going to protect it, and they want to see it thrive, don't you? And I think that's really a key thing for our times, isn't it? Is also the other side of this, helping people to reconnect to nature, is deepening a different type of relationship with it, where it's valued not for what it can do for us, but just being being there, really, really.
Yeah, here, here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah. Um, I think that's, I think the work you do is a beautiful example of, I use the word subject, and that's not even the right word, is it? Because it's not a subject object.
Yeah, it's so hard, isn't it?
It's
Our
a different
language just
terms,
doesn't,
isn't it? Yeah.
our
Yeah.
language just doesn't have, our language falls short, should I say, at times of being able to really sort of encompass the ideas and the knowledge.
hmm
And I think it's something you touch on as well, is this idea of communion. And it's deeper than words, isn't it? It's this opening of the heart. And you mentioned it earlier, just different ways of experiencing the world around us. And I think that's really well, there's so many takeaways from your book, and I would just absolutely encourage everyone to go and get a copy of your book, to
Thank you.
read it,
Yeah.
because it really is a lovely companion. I think it feels nurturing to be to realize that you're not alone in the feelings that you're having. I think that's a big thing. And that's part of what I'm doing here with this podcast as well, is, feeling that sense of, actually, I don't have to carry this burden alone, but then also, lovely ideas and wisdom of how people can move through the feelings as well, rather than feeling consumed and lost and stuck in them.
Yeah. Well, it's exactly why I wrote the book, is because this is the conversation that I want to be in. It feels like the kind of conversation that we're having and that we get to have with other people is exactly what we need to be doing now, because I think we're all trying to figure out our best role and the way we might live with purpose and vibrancy, and still be deeply aware and collaborating with hopes for healing,
Yeah.
and renewal. So in writing the book, it was a good practice, because I kept finding things I'm like, oh, I don't know. What do I really think?
Yeah.
Some of where I came to be, I had to write my way there.
Yeah.
I would be sitting at my laptop and I would say, I don't know. I don't know. And I would walk away and I would read and I would write in my journal and I would wander in the woods and I would try again and I'd have to walk away. And I still think it's not, in many ways, like everything we do, it's not a finished product. It's still questions
Yeah.
that are worth wrestling with and learning more about. And
Yeah.
that only happens when we do it together,
Yeah,
really.
I think that's I think I was talking to someone the other day, and we were saying, like, I think it's education that makes us a little bit afraid to, and by education I mean the school system, to ask questions that we don't know the
Mhm.
answers to, because you obviously get judged on whether you can answer the question versus whether you can ask the
Yeah.
question. And I think, really, I love that idea that you've just shared, that actually, sometimes we need to ask the questions that we don't actually have the answers to, and we need to sit in the question and, make space for the wisdom, or it might not even be an answer. It might just be a first step rather than
Right.
actually an answer to come forward to us.
Right.
And then and realize that it's always there's always going to be an unfolding. There's the story is still being written, and
Hmm.
um we have to find a way to do things now, but be comfortable with the fact that we can't see beyond the fog at the moment,
Yeah.
but we can take that first step. Um,
Well,
yeah,
that's exactly why the book begins with the story of the old woman in the cave who is weaving the world. And do you mind if I just tell a quick
yeah, no,
rendition of
please
it?
do.
Yeah,
That would be
yeah.
lovely.
So it's told by many Native nations in times of great difficulty and uncertainty. And Michael Meade, in his book, has retold the story of an old woman who sits in a cave weaving the world. And she is weaving this beautiful tapestry. Um, and she also has the task to stir the pot at the back of the cave that contains all of the seeds and elements of the world. And she has to keep stirring that because if she doesn't, they might burn, and who knows what havoc
That
might
could
come
go.
from that. So the woman sits and weaves, and at her feet lies an old black dog. When she gets up and walks very slowly, because she's very old, to the back of the cave to stir the pot, the dog gets up and begins to pick with his teeth at the threads of the tapestry. And he pulls and he tugs and he chews until all of the tapestry lies fallen apart, unraveled on the floor of the cave. And the old woman makes her way back and sees this destruction of this beautiful weaving that was wrought by the dog. And so she stands, and then she sits, and she looks, and she thinks. And then slowly she begins to pick up a thread and another thread and begins to reweave. And so that story, I'm not going to tell you what it means because we don't know what it means, right? That to me is
Yeah,
a story that we live into,
yeah.
and we live into it differently, different times and at different places. But I'm teaching a class right now for our lifelong learning program at our university. And my question is, so where are you this week? Where are you
Yeah,
this week in the
yeah,
story of the old woman and the black dog?
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Um, because one more example, one more story of what's going on in the world that we're living in and why knowing exactly what will happen is, I think, going to be beyond us,
yeah,
as maybe it always has been and
yeah.
always will be.
Yeah, yeah, and oh, I love that. I loved it when I read it, and
Yeah.
just hearing you speak it is even better. And I think that's probably a lovely place for us to round up, is just to leave people with that beautiful vision and thinking, where are we in the story, and how they can interpret it and what it would mean to their own lives and their relationship with nature. But yeah, thank you so much. It's been absolutely lovely, and I know that you're going to have another book coming out soon, which I'm rather excited about because it's about trees.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
So,
right. That's right. Yeah.
so
My colleague Beth Norcross and I, Beth founded the Center for Spirituality and Nature, and she and I have been teaching a class on this topic for a number of years now. And we are writing on the spiritual wisdom of trees, which will be published by Broadleaf Books and be out in April of 25.
wow,
So
yes,
we're in the throes of trying to finish up the
yeah,
chapters we're on in that. So.
yeah. Yeah, so there's lots of things for people to look forward to from you. So I would highly encourage them to not just obviously read your book, but to have a look at the links that we're going to share below, so that they can follow what you're up to and the amazing things you do. You've got numerous things that you're involved with that they can find out more and share with you and enjoy the comfort of community and being seen and witnessed by someone who's here experiencing this journey with us as well. So thank you so much. It's been really lovely and just a privilege to talk to you, and I hope to get another opportunity, I'm sure.
Oh, that would be great. Thank you so much, Fiona. Thank you for the work you're doing and for your graciousness and co-creation with the many people and the living beings in this world, and bow of gratitude for all you do.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening to the Nurtured by Nature podcast. I truly hope this conversation has brought some hope and inspiration into your life. I would love to have these messages ripple out across the world. So if you can, please share this episode with your friends, leave a review on your favourite podcast player, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. I would love to hear from you, so please feel free to connect with me on the links provided in the podcast description. But most importantly, thank you so much for being a part of this journey with me. But don't forget to simply get out there and enjoy the natural world.